Hello students, let's learn English together. Today we are going to explore the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. This particular poem tells the story of 600 soldiers on horseback who led the charge into a valley to capture the enemy's artillery. During the charge, many of the soldiers lost their lives on the battlefield. Additionally, the poem praises the nobility and bravery shown by the soldiers despite the futility of the charge. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to recite the poem with the correct pronunciation and intonation, explain the structure and summary of the poem, and describe the persona, setting, tone, and mood of the poem. And lastly, you should be able to list down the themes and moral values of the poem. Before we begin our lesson today, let's listen to a recital of the poem.
The Charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600.
Alright, before we analyze the meaning of the poem, let's look at the poem structure. If you look closely, you will see that The Charge of the Light Brigade is a poem that portrayed the horror and the courage of men during war. This is an extract taken from the full poem. In other words, the actual poem has more than 3 stanzas from what you are already seeing here. This extract consists of 3 stanzas of varying length. There are 8 lines in stanza 1, 9 lines in stanza 2, and 9 lines in stanza 3. The rhyming scheme of this poem varies from stanza to stanza. This extract of the poem illustrates the event and the scenery that took place during an attack led by 600 British horsemen towards their enemies. It also tells the readers about the outcome of their attack. Now let us study the summary for each stanza. The first stanza begins with a description of horseback soldiers charging bravely at their enemies. The battlefield was described as Valley of Death, signifying the soldiers were charging to their death. It was as if they knew some of them were going to die on the battlefield. It was a total mayhem with bodies and dead people scattered everywhere. Hence, this is why the phrase Valley of Death was repeated many times throughout the poem. The phrase half a league is also repeated twice to give the poem a rhythmic quality of horses galloping. All in all, there were 600 horsemen in the Light Brigade. They were taking orders from their fearless commander, who was not named. During this attack, the brigade had to charge at their enemies in an attempt to seize their guns. The second stanza begins with the command, "Forward, the Light Brigade." continually being used to show a sense of urgency in the poem. The poet also posed a question which may have crossed the reader's mind. Some may wonder, were the soldiers afraid? Were they ready to die on the battlefield? What was running through their minds as they charged towards the enemy's fire? In spite of the fear they had, the poet explained that none of them lost courage, although they knew it was a mistake to attack the enemies. As soldiers, they had to follow their commander's order, even though they knew the odds were stacked against them. The poet then explained that the soldiers were loyal and brave men who knew their place and did not question the order. They simply obeyed the command even though they knew death awaited them. They were brave men who were willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of their country. In the third stanza, the soldiers were surrounded by gunfire from all sides. There were cannons blasting from every direction. In the heat of battle, the sound of cannons and explosions made a thundering sound. This gives us a vivid description of the horror that they faced. Despite the attack, the soldiers rode on bravely and with great courage, although they had little chance to make it out alive. So, who is the persona in this poem? In my opinion, the persona is a fellow countryman. He wrote the poem to honor the brave soldiers who died heroically during the battle. It is written from the third-person view in which the persona narrates the account of the battle. The setting of this poem can be divided into two parts, which are time and place. The time setting of this poem took place on the 25th of October 1854 during the Crimean War when the British and French fought against Russia. During the Battle of Balaclava, the British suffered heavy casualties due to miscommunication in the chain of command. The Light Brigade was instead sent on a frontal assault against a different artillery battery, which was well prepared. The place setting of this poem took place at North Valley, a ground nearby the city of Balaclava in the Crimean Peninsula where the Light Brigade fought the enemy. The general tone of this poem is praise and amazement. In the poem, the poet praised the bravery and nobility shown by the soldiers against the odds. The poet also pointed out how the brave 600 men obeyed orders although they knew that they would die during the charge. The mood, on the other hand, is energetic yet grim, as the poet described the scenery of the battle by using literary devices such as repetition to depict the action and horror that took place during the charge. The theme in a story is its underlying message or the big idea. It is the belief that the author tries to convey in the writing. This belief or idea surpasses cultural barriers. It is usually universal in nature. When a theme is universal, it touches on the human experience, regardless of race or language. There are several themes highlighted in this poem. Let's study all of them. The first theme of this poem is the complexities of war. In this poem, the poet tries to highlight the realities of war as it brings out the best and the worst of humanity. For example, the line, "Someone had blundered," tells us that the 600 soldiers faced imminent death as a result of their commander's mistakes. The soldiers had no choice but to obey orders, resulting in the tragic loss of so many lives. However, the poet also celebrated the courage and loyalty displayed by the soldiers despite the futility of the situation. The second theme of this poem is courage and heroism. The poet honored the bravery and heroism of the Light Brigade, who did not hesitate in the face of adversary. Throughout the poem, the poet used various techniques to express the hopelessness of the situation and the horror the soldiers experienced. The men of the Light Brigade deserve our respect, hence we should honor them for their courage. Lastly, the theme of this poem is loyalty and duty. In this poem, the soldiers followed the commander's order without question. This shows that they had a strong sense of duty towards their leader. In addition, they were also willing to sacrifice their life in order to protect their country. Moral values are standard accepted principles of life. It relates to the principles of right and wrong of a human character. It is also the standards of good and evil, which govern a person's behavior and choices. In literature, moral values are important lessons from the writing which we can apply in life. There are several moral values highlighted in this poem. Let's study all of them. The first moral value of this poem is we must have loyalty and courage. Courage and loyalty are the qualities that we have to strive for in our lives. Being loyal to our country will protect the sovereignty of our nation. Without courage, we will never be able to overcome the obstacles that we face in our lives. The second moral value of this poem is we must instill the spirit of patriotism in our lives. As a citizen, we must love and defend our country at all costs. We don't only have to protect our country during war, but we must also defend our country from foreign influences. Lastly, the moral value of this poem is we must ask questions at times for our own sake. The poem reminds us to question things around us instead of following blindly like a herd of sheep. If the brave Light Brigade had not followed their orders blindly, many lives would have been saved on that very day. They could have at least questioned their commander's strategy, which in return could have saved many innocent lives. For this reason, we must always think of ourselves and decide what is best for us. I hope you have learned new things from this video and I hope to see you again soon. Till next time, goodbye.